Hello guys, and welcome to this week's guitar score lesson, which is a very special one. For today, we shall be partaking in a ear training masterclass. This has been a widely requested topic and last month was voted for by our premium members. So let's get stuck in and dive into the esoteric world of ear training. So first of all, what exactly is ear training and why is it important? Put simply, ear training is just your ability to recognize certain sounds and patterns within music and to be able to process this information and transfer it onto your instrument or into your composing or whatever it is you're doing. Because honestly, it really doesn't matter how good you are technically on guitar. If you have poor listening skills and weak ears, then, it's going to be very difficult for you to do much with your technical ability, right? It's going to be hard for you to compose music. It's going to be hard for you to improvise. It's going to be hard to figure songs out by ear. So if that's all stuff you're interested in, like improvising, composing, figuring songs out by ear especially, then it's deathly important that you put a lot of time into this and, sufficiently train your ears to a decent level. So the world of ear training is honestly limitless. There's really no end to this rabbit hole. But in my opinion, there are two very integral areas that you need to spend the most time on, really, and it's sort of like the core of everything in music, and that is intervals and chords. Being able to recognize intervals and recognize chords quickly and be able to, transfer them onto guitar is so important. For example, if you can instantly recognize that this is a major chord and this is a perfect fifth interval, then you're going to have a much easier time in your musical journey. So that's exactly what we're going to do today in this masterclass. The first half of the video is going to be on recognizing chords, and the second half is going to be on recognizing intervals. What I'm going to do, I'm going to run through with you all of the core chords and intervals that you need to know, what they sound like and ways that can help you recognize them very quickly. And then at the end, I'm going to do like a little sort of quiz to test what you've learned this lesson and just see how well you can do. So, chords. I'm not going to get into the theory nitty-gritty of chords because, that's kind of out the scope of this lesson, and I've got plenty of other materials on that stuff in the guitar school. So if you're not really too sure on what chords are and, how you build them, what they're comprised of, then I would thoroughly recommend go check that stuff out first for, a bit more context. But why exactly do I need to know chords when I'm a rock and metal player, you may be asking? Chords are way more integral to your musical knowledge than you may think. Absolutely everything that you do, whether it be riffs, composing, soloing, improvising, everything comes down to chord knowledge, really, at the end of the day, and what the underlying harmony is. And the better grasp you have of harmony and how chords function, then the easier time you're going to have, put simply. Ironically, having a great grasp of chords is going to help your lead playing way more than any technique practice will do. Right, so there are 10 core chords that I think are extremely integral to understanding and being able to recognize quickly. Obviously, the world of chords is limitless. There's so many different, variations and extensions of all these different chords. But it's really not essential that you know all that stuff unless you're, like a hardcore jazzer, which I know for sure that most of you aren't. And in that case, in the rock and metal world, really, you just need to be able to recognize these 10 chords and you will be set. This is like probably way over 90% of what you'll encounter in your guitar playing journey in the rock and metal world. And honestly, there are some of these you may not even ever encounter, but it's good to know anyway. And so these are major, minor, sus4, sus2, major 7, minor 7, dominant 7, diminished, half diminished, and augmented. Hopefully you know a good chunk of those already, but in any case, we're going to run through them one at a time. And for each of these chords, I'm going to accompany them with let's say like an icon, some sort of visual representation that you can sort of like memorize and recall when you're trying to, associate a certain sound that you hear with the chord type. Because I feel like for you visual learners out there, I'm one of those as well. it's very, very helpful to have some sort of visual representation there locked in your head to recall later to help you. And yeah, let's get started. All right, first off, we have the major chord. Comprised of a root, a major third, and a fifth. You know, a major chord is that trademark happy sound, right? That sort of, it's like the core of all of Western music theory. You know, it's like the foundation, good old major chord. Its sound is defined by feeling very bright and like happy and positive. I'd say, you know, as well as the minor chords, these are the two easiest chords to recognize, yeah? So hopefully you can already recognize that trademark major chord sound. So just take a few moments just to listen to this and really sink in what a major chord sounds like. And so for a major chord, I feel like a good old happy face is probably the the easiest, most obvious visual representation you can have. So a major chord from now on will be signified by a happy face. Right, minor chord, the polar opposite of the major chord, the evil twin. So instead of a major chord sounding very happy and bright, a minor chord sounds very sad and a bit darker. Because instead of being built with a major third, it's built with a minor third. And that flattened third really changes the whole sound. Just really take a moment to listen and let that sorrow sink in. That dark, melancholic sound of the minor chord. Pretty much the basis of all rock and metal music, right? I'm sure you're very familiar with the sound of a minor chord. And obviously, for a minor chord, we're going to use a sad face to represent this, okay? So we're going to use a sad face icon. All right, next up, we have a sus4 chord. So, sus4 chord is an interesting one. In case you don't know, we build a sus4 chord by replacing the third. So instead of having this third, we're replacing it with a fourth. So it's built of a root, a fourth, and a fifth. Technically, it's not really major or minor, but it does sound quite happy and uplifting. How I often think about this is in two ways. You can either think about this as like the 80s chords. That's often how I think about it. Yeah, it has like a very, very strong kind of 80s vibe. Like that. Or you can also think about it as like the prayer chords, like, you know, at the end of a prayer in church and they go, Amen. Like on the organ, it's always like a sus4 to major. Like that. Amen. Yeah, it's the Amen chord. Yeah, so just take a few moments to really listen to that sus4 sound. Like how does that make you feel? Like, what does it sound like to you? Another very easy way to think about the sus4 chord is that it wants to resolve. It sounds kind of weird on its own. Sounds a little dissonant almost. And you can hear that it wants to resolve, like this sus4 wants to resolve back to the major third. Yeah. As for a visual representation, I think we're going to go with a prayer icon to reflect that whole sort of church, end of prayer, amen vibe. All right, and sus2, the counterpart of the sus4 chord. Sus2 is a cool one. Again, instead of having a third in the chord, we're replacing it with a second, or a major second. So it's a root, major second, and fifth. sus2 is a very popular chord in like modern metal, in like gent and metalcore and stuff, because it sounds very sort of like vibey. That's the best way I can describe a sus2 chord. It sounds very vibey. Love the sound of a sus2. It's very cool. If you listen to, I don't know, like a lot of like Pliny or something like that, you'll hear lots of sus2 chords because it just sounds very like lush and, well, vibey, again, for lack of a better word. Now just take a few moments just to really soak in the sound of a sus2 chord. In the guitar world, you'll often see guitarists play a sus2 like this. It's like a sort of a stacked power chord manner. Very popular thing for guitarists to do, and that is just a sus2 basically. You see, we've got the root, fifth, and then this stacked power chord up here. That's just a ninth, right? Or a second. Yeah, just a sus2. So, for visual representation, I'm going to use some shades for the sus2 because it just sounds very, like, cool and vibey, like I said before, like, very lush. And, yeah, I think a little face with shades is a perfect way to represent that. All right, moving on to the 7th chords now. First off, we have a major 7. So, like the sus2, it sounds very, like, you know, cool and vibey as well. It has a similar kind of sound, but it sounds warmer. It's quite often handy when it comes to ear training to refer to sounds in temperature. A lot of people do that. And a sus2 to me sounds quite sort of moderate sort of temperature, quite cool. But a major 7 sounds very hot, so like a lot warmer, like more exotic. You just imagine you were sort of like sitting on the beach at holiday and some like, you know, annoying beach bar music playing in the background. Some sort of like, all this sort of thing. Yeah, that's sort of like what major 7 sounds like to me. It sounds very like holiday-y, very like lush, very hot, and I guess loungy is another word you could use to describe it, because you like hear it a lot in like you know, lo-fi, like loungy music. It's a funny one because even though it's based off a major chord, but that major 7 that's added in makes it sound a little bit sort of sad as well. There's a little bit of like, just a little bit of sorrow in there. That's because, little theory tidbit, if you take away the root of a major chord, you're left with a minor triad of the chord, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 frets up, a major third up. This is just a, see, in a D major 7, you have a F sharp minor triad here in the first inversion. So a D major 7 basically is just a F sharp minor first inversion over D. That's a very long-winded way of naming a major 7, but it helps to give a bit of context about why it sounds kind of sad, and that's the reason why. So just take a moment to really listen to the sound of that major 7, soak it up, let it wash over you. It sounds very warm, lush, kind of tropical, loungy. And for major 7, I think we're going to use a palm tree as a visual representation for that, because it sounds kind of like tropically, like a bit vacation-y and hot. So I think a palm tree really like sums it up well. All right, next up we have a minor 7. Has a very, very different vibe to the major 7 chord. To me, a minor 7 sounds a lot more sort of like funky, right? A lot more uplifting. It's kind of ironic that the major 7 sounds kind of like somber, but the minor 7 sounds very like uplifting and quite cheerful. And unlike the major 7 chord, the reason why the minor 7 sounds kind of like happy is because if you take away the root note, you're left with a major triad, unlike the minor triad that was inside the major 7. It's getting confusing. If you notice here, in a D minor 7, we have here a F major triad in the first inversion this time. So this is basically just a F major first inversion over a D, which makes a D minor 7. And that is why a minor 7 chord sounds kind of happy. So, like I said, this is kind of an easier one to recognize, I think, compared to some of the other chords, because it sounds just like sounds very, like, definitively funky. It kind of sounds very much like a pentatonic scale as well. Like, it sounds exactly like you're just playing a pentatonic scale with, like, the notes all at once, right? Yeah, because all the notes in it are just in the pentatonic scale, right? Yeah, so take a few moments again to really listen to the sound of a minor 7 chord. So it sounds like a major chord, but with a slight sort of funky twist, right? That's how I think about it. Major, but a bit funkier. And if you've played a lot of pentatonic scale... so for a minor 7 chord visual representation, we're going to use a little dancing man, I think. Because, yeah, minor 7 sounds kind of funky and dancey. Makes you want to get on your feet. So I think a dancing person is very much the vibe we're going to go for here. All right, next up, the last of the 7th chords is a dominant 7th. Okay, so a dominant 7th, in case you're not sure, is basically a mix of a major and minor chord. So it's a major chord, but we're having a minor 7 in there, okay, which is a flat 7. And normally you would have a major 7 for a major chord, but this time we have a minor 7 inside a major chord. And dominant 7s, they have a very specific sound. To me, they sound very grand and like a regal. Yeah, I guess like, how it sounds will depend on your musical background, but to me, who listened to a lot of classical music growing up, you know, dominant 7th chords are all over classical music. And their function is to always resolve back to their 1. Because dominant 7s are typically the 5th of a key. So for example, if you're in A major, the dominant 7 will be in E. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like E, E7. You see it wants to go back to A major. You just imagine it being played on like a big, grand church organ, you know, like super loud and grand. And again. And that's how I think about dominant 7s. It's like they always want to be returning home to the 1. Because like a dominant 7th on its own sounds kind of weird. Like you wouldn't just like jam on that, right? It sounds a little bit unstable. But it wants to go back. You see, you hear how that sort of like has a very strong resolution back home. And in minor keys as well, it's exactly the same thing. Like, say, if you're in D minor, go to the 5th, which is A7. Yeah, so a 7th chord sounds a little dissonant. It's like a major chord, but with a very sort of like a grandiose twist. Can also sound very bluesy. Like if you have more of like a blues ear rather than like a more sort of classical ear, that's probably how you recognize this chord. Like you can just build like a 12-bar blues around 7th chords. Yeah, that sort of thing, right? So again, let's just take a few moments to just listen and soak in the sound of a dominant 7th. And for a dominant seventh, we're going to use a home symbol as a representation because that dominant seventh has that sound of always wanting to go back home. It sounds very unstable and it always wants to be traveling back home to the one. So yeah, that's how I'm going to try and get you guys to think about it. So think about like a very grandiose sound, or like a bluesy sound, or just the sound of like wanting to return home. Either of those three will work very nicely for you. All right, and next up we have the diminished chord, the infamously most evil of all chords. Okay, this chord, of course, is built up of a root, a minor third, and a flat fifth. Okay. This shouldn't be too hard of a one for you because, diminished chord, it has one of the most, famous signature sounds out of any chord. It sounds instantly very evil, very dark, very unstable. You'll often hear the diminished chord being moved around in minor thirds like that. Because the diminished scale is what you call a parallel scale, which means you can just move it around in certain intervals and it will always be the same. For example, like if you move this diminished chord here, it's exactly the same notes, just in a different order. And again, exactly the same notes, just in a different order. Then you go all the way up in thirds until you get back home. Yeah? So let's just take a few moments just to listen to the good old diminished chord. Another context you'll often hear diminished chords is as a passing chord. It's very common to be used like this, especially in more old school music. For example, if you wanted to transition between like a C to a D, you could go like a C, C sharp diminished, and then D, like that. Yeah, it's like a very cool tool to transition between two chords to sort of like bridge that little gap. So obviously for the diminished chord, we're going to use a good old devil as the visual representation. I think that's one speaks for itself, right? Pretty obvious. All right, now we move on to our last two, which I think may be the hardest for you guys to recognize, perhaps. First of all, we have the half diminished chord, otherwise known as the minor 7 flat 5. Like the other name suggested, it's just a minor 7 chord, like we did earlier, but with a flat 5 in a true diminished fashion. Yep. So this is a weird one that you really have to spend a lot of time with to get into your head. Because you don't really hear this chord too often in metal music and rock music. Only like very subtly most of the time. You'll hear it more in like traditional songwriting or like pop music and I guess jazz as well. And to me, the sound of a half diminished chord on its own sounds very jazzy. There's just something about it, just that vibe is like jazzy as fuck, like, and very cool. Just imagine like a sort of a smoky jazz club in New York City or something, and like a... And the way I always recognized this chord was from Symphony of Destruction by Megadeth. In the solo he does that arpeggio run up a half diminished chord. Yeah, all of that is entirely just this F sharp half diminished chord. Just arpeggiated up different inversions all the way up here. You hear it just has like a very particular sound that is very hard to pinpoint. It's kind of an abstract sound, and the only way you can really get it into your head is just by listening to it a lot. But like I said, it sounds very jazzy to me, and maybe a little bit like sort of Japanesey as well, which is maybe why Marty Friedman uses it so much. It does have a slight sort of Japanesey sound when you arpeggiate it. Very cool sound, one of my favorites. So yeah, let's take a moment to just have a close listen to the half diminished chord. Try to really let the sound sink in. Sounds kind of mysterious as well, right? Another way you can use to recognize this chord is the fact that it's often used to resolve up a semitone to a major chord, because it's the 7th chord in a major chord scale. For example, like a E half diminished will resolve to an F major. It's like a very definite resolution there. So if you hear it as that, if you can hear it and just think about it like moving up a semitone to home, that can help as well. But yeah, the half diminished chord, ladies and gentlemen. Very underrated chord, super cool. And to denote that in a visual representation, I'm going to use a saxophone, just because I think it sounds very jazzy. And if you think about it in that manner, it could be a little easier to recognize, I think. All right, and chord number 10, our last one, the augmented chord. All right, another spicy one. This is kind of the polar opposite to the diminished chord. Even though it still sounds like pretty evil and dark, it does so in a different way. So our diminished chord is a minor chord with a flat 5. But a augmented chord is a major chord with a sharp 5, okay? Yeah, so instead of a major chord being like this, we're going up a semitone here to a sharp 5. To me, this sounds very mysterious and magical and like a little bit whimsical. And you often hear this in, like cartoons and stuff where, someone gets like hit over a head and they go a bit sort of like, whoa. Or someone's sort of like dreaming and they're like falling into like a deep sleep and, the screen goes all wavy and you always hear like an augmented chord like over like a whole tone thing. Yeah, it has like a very particular sound. And also, you'll hear this a lot in sort of like spacey music and also in like fantasy music. Because when you arpeggiate it, it sounds very sort of like ethereal, like kind of cosmic. Yeah, it's like a very particular kind of like fantastical sound to it. And also it's often used as like a passing chord, just like the diminished was. For example, if you were like in E major, you could do this sort of thing. Yeah, it's like you hear this a lot in sort of like old-timey music. This sort of just passing chromatic note, just changing the chords, and augmented being like the passing chord in the middle. This kind of thing. So for the last time, let's take a few moments to really soak in the augmented chord and just try and ingrain it in your subconsciousness, all right? Sounds very, very mysterious. Kind of evil, but not in like a devilish way. Kind of in like a sort of magical way. Like evil magic. And there we have it, the augmented chord. For the visual representation for the augmented chord, I think we're going to use a big old question mark icon, because it just sounds very, very mysterious, right? And I think the question mark sort of best denotes that, right? All right, guys, and that concludes the first part of the masterclass, chords. So, I hope that all was very informative and made sense for you. If you weren't sure about any of the chords, then I would heavily suggest just go back, take as much time as you need, maybe single out specific chords that you really weren't quite sure on. Because I know some of those are going to be a lot harder than others to try and, seep in to your brain. You could also play the chords yourself as you try to, learn the sounds of them. But really, eventually, the aim is to be able to recognize them just by sound alone and without the conscious input of you playing as well, because obviously that's a lot easier because you know what you're playing. Alrighty, so now it's time to put everything you've learned this lesson to the test in this short little quiz where I'm going to play you a series of different chords, and I want you to jot down your answers and let me know what type of chords they are, okay? At first, I'm going to give you some hints by using the little visual representation icons that we used along the way. And then after that, I'm going to take away your training wheels and remove those representations, and you have to figure out the chords by using just your ears alone. So, without further ado, let's crack on with intervals. So, an interval is the gap between two different notes. For example, this is an interval of a fifth, because if you go up the scale from the root, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yep, is a distance of a fifth. Likewise, this is a major seventh. Because if you go up a major scale from the root, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that's a major seventh. And likewise, this is a minor third. Because if you go up a minor scale from the root, 1, 2, 3. So why is this important? For many reasons. I guess the biggest and most obvious is when it comes to learning songs by ear. Like, this is absolutely huge. For example, if you're trying to learn a solo by ear and you hear this on the record. Yeah, and you hear that and you're like, oh, okay. So I can hear that it's two notes alternating, but like, which notes are there? It's like, oh, hang on, I know. That's a major second. Yeah, I know that's a gap of a tone. And likewise, if you hear this, you can be like, ah, shit, I know that. That sounds like a minor scale. That's just a minor scale ascending in just regular intervals. And also, this can really help your improvising as well. For example, if you're in the key of like A minor, and you're like, okay, instead of just like randomly hitting notes in the pentatonic scale, I'm going to be a bit more methodical about it, and let's say I'm going to start on the root, and then I'm going to go up a fifth, because I know that's a pretty solid way to start a solo. And then I'm going to be like, yeah, then I think I'm going to go to the sixth at some point, the minor sixth, because I know that is a really sexy interval that really has like a lot of emotional weight. So I'm going to bend up to this F at some point as well. Yeah? So you can be a little bit more sort of like, what's the word? A little bit more like surgical, I suppose, and a little bit more, planned with your note choices instead of just sort of like shooting in the dark randomly, which is fine sometimes, but it's also good to know what you're doing, right? Why not both? Why not both, right? So there are a variety of like core intervals, we'll call them. So we have a minor second, we have a major second, a minor third, a major third, a perfect fourth, a flat fifth, a perfect fifth, a minor sixth, a major sixth, a minor seventh, a major seventh, and an octave. And so this covers every interval, every possible interval within your regular minor and major scales. So that may seem very daunting, but what we're going to do is go through every single one, and I'm going to show you, obviously the sound, so you can start to sort of bake it into your memory, and also some song examples that are going to make it very easy for you to recognize which each one is. It may seem like a bit of an impossible task at first when I'm like running through them all consecutively. You must think like, oh my god, like how am I ever going to memorize all those? But once you start to apply them to real world song examples, it's a lot easier, trust me. And again, like the chords, we're going to have a quiz at the end of the lesson to see how much you've learned, to test your knowledge. So without further ado, let's get stuck into intervals. Right, first of all, good old major second. Obviously, in metal, you're going to hear this interval all over the place, right? It's probably, I don't know, if the flat fifth is the most evil interval, this is the second for sure, right? You hear this all over the place in metal. That's super easy to recognize. There's a couple of song suggestions you can do to memorize this if you're struggling. First one is Symphony of Destruction. It's obviously after the first bit of the riff. This bit, right? That's a minor second. Yeah, this resolution from F down to E. Yeah, this is like the most metal movement, right? I mean, you see this all over the place. Just 0 and 1, right? It's a fucking meme. If you can't recognize a minor second, then you are not a metalhead. I'm revoking your metal card. Another obvious song example is Jaws, the Jaws theme tune, if anyone remembers that film from like, I think it's the 70s. But it's a pretty famous piece of music that has that very famous, like a minor second movement. So that's another easy way to remember it. Major second. All right. So the easiest way to remember this, honestly, is just think of a major or minor scale going up. Right. Any scale that has this tone movement at the start. And there's your major second. So if you're going up a major scale. Or a minor scale. Yeah, the major second is the same. I know the wording is a little bit confusing, because even in a minor scale, you're still playing a major second, so don't worry too much about the wording. This is literally just to differentiate between this and this. Yeah, so it's a little bit confusing, but don't worry too much about the naming, right? Just think about it as, yeah. I guess a really easy song example for that one is the Happy Birthday song, right?
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Yeah, it's the second note of Happy Birthday. Yep, so either think about it as like the second note of a scale going up, or Happy Birthday. Okay, that's the major second. Minor third, another pretty metal interval. You hear this all over the place in rock and metal music, right? This movement from the root up a minor third. I don't know, you've got like, what, Iron Man? Yeah, it's the second chord of that, and Smoke on the Wall. Yep, so the second chord in that as well is also the minor third. Major third. You may be a bit less familiar with this sound because you don't really hear it as much in rock and metal music. The easiest way to remember it, in my opinion, is just to think of like a major triad, right? You know, if you know your basic major triads and minor triads, you know, you've got root, third, and fifth. It's just the second note of that, right? It's the third of your major chord, major triad. Has like that very sort of like solid, definitive major sound. I couldn't think of too many examples of this one that you guys might recognize, but I guess maybe like Kumbaya, you know, that classic old campfire acoustic song.
Kumbaya, my lord, kumbaya.
Yeah, it's the second note of that, right? It's the second note is a major third. So yeah, just think about like a major chord or a major triad. It's the second note of that. It's like the major note, right? Happy as fuck. And if you're still struggling, think of like Kumbaya or something. Which again is just going up a major triad. Yep, so just think major for that one. All right, next up is the perfect fourth. So, the fourth and the fifth intervals are called perfect. This is because they're exactly the same whether you're in major or minor. Because whether you're playing a major scale or a minor scale, the fourth and the fifth are always the same. So they're called perfect, okay? So perfect fourth and perfect fifth. Now that's the sound of a fourth. So I guess the most obvious way you can think about this is Smells Like Teen Spirit. One of the most famous use of fourths of all time. You know, you're starting at F, you're going up a fourth to the next chord. And when you go up to the G sharp, that's also a fourth going up. Yep. That sound as well has like a very sort of like a very specific movement. It sounds very sort of like bouncy, right? So that's how I think of a fourth. It sounds very bouncy. Or let's just think about Smells Like Teen Spirit. Next up is the flat fifth, the metal interval. So obviously, the easiest example there is Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath. Yeah, so the last note there, the evil sounding note, that's the flat fifth. And like, you know, anytime you hear these kind of like bluesy riffs, this sort of thing, that chord that sounds bluesy is always going to be a flat fifth. Yeah. So just think evil. Now, even just those notes alone sounds evil as fuck. And if you want to think of songs, think of Black Sabbath. So, perfect fifth. This sounds a lot more stable than the flat fifth. Whereas the flat fifth sounds sort of like, evil. Perfect fifth sounds very, solid and triumphant. I think the go-to for most people is the Star Wars theme tune for perfect fifth. So the second note of the Star Wars theme. And also you can just think about a power chord, right? If you know the sound of a power chord, which is just root and fifth. Yeah, just think about a power chord broken up and you've got your perfect fifth. A lot of people actually get perfect fifth mixed up with an octave, and I can see that. Because that interval is so strong, it nearly sounds like the same note. Yeah? So I guess that's another way to think about it. If you think it's an octave, but you're not quite sure, then it's probably not. It's probably a fifth. So yeah, just think about the Star Wars song. Everyone knows that, right? Or think about just a power chord broken up. So minor sixth next. It's going to be a little tricky one, but it's used fairly often in metal. It's not too unheard of. It sounds very sad. This is one of those really sort of strong minor intervals, right? So you got the minor third, and then you got the minor sixth. This is a very strong, sad minor interval. So the way I recognise it personally is Earth Song by Michael Jackson, because I'm old. Yeah, the one that goes, yeah? It's the second note of that. You could also think of Crazy Train. That's a pretty easy one. Yeah, so not that, not the fifth, it's the minor sixth on the fifth fret, confusingly enough. That. Yeah, so that's another way you can recognize it. If you're familiar with these sort of chords as well, when you take a power chord and you move that down, which creates a sort of an inverted major third. You could also say it's a minor sixth interval from the root. So if you know that sound well, that's another way to think about it. First of all, I think about it being a very sad sounding interval that's not a minor third, so I know it's going to be a minor sixth. And also it's the first two notes of Earth Song, and also it's the third note in Crazy Train. Okay, major sixth next. This is a tricky one. So that's a very dissonant interval when you play them together, which you don't really hear too often, especially in rock and metal music. You don't hear this sound all that much, but there's a few pretty good examples. One of the easiest ones is Jingle Bells, but not the start. I think it's the verse.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh.
This bit. Ran through the snow when a one-horse open sleigh. This bit, right? So this is a major sixth interval jump. This is probably the most straightforward example I can think of. Yep. So the second note of the verse. It's a pretty cool one. You've also got Leia's theme from Star Wars that has that same sort of movement. And also Tifa's theme from Final Fantasy VII, if you've got any Final Fantasy heads. In that sort of context, like in Leia's theme and Tifa's theme, it's actually a very sort of like melancholic, sad interval, which is kind of interesting. It's not as like happy sounding as you think it would be, coming from a major scale. Even though it's in a major context. Yeah, very cool interval. Kind of underrated one, I feel. Kind of slept on interval. Like sixths are really like emotionally impactful intervals, I feel. Like very cool. All right, minor seventh next. Another kind of weird one. Yeah, you pretty much like never hear that sort of interval. It's a very odd one. The only example I could think of that was very obvious for this was Can't Stop by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Pretty easy one. Once I learned that, I was like, oh yeah, of course. And that became very easy then. Like, that's instantly recognizable now for me. Yeah, so hopefully you're familiar with that song, and just think of Can't Stop by the Chili Peppers. Nice and easy one. All right, major seventh. This is a very cool one. Sounds kind of dissonant because these two notes are only a semitone apart. But obviously you're playing the second one up an octave. So it sounds very dissonant. And the way I always thought about this was like, if I hear a dissonant interval, that's not the flat fifth, which is very obvious, or the minor second, which is also very obvious, then it's probably the major seventh. Because it's like, it's very dissonant, but also you can hear the notes are quite far apart. So you can hear that it's a dissonance that's sort of like, you know, quite wide, quite a wide dissonance. And if you want a very easy song example, just think of Take On Me. Yeah, the Take On Me. Just the second note of the Take On Me chorus. Super easy. And the last one, octave. Very easy. I feel like recognizing an octave is like the most fundamental test of your ears, because if you can't recognize an octave, I feel like you're going to have a hard time with ear training, because it's all like one of the most basic fundamental intervals that you need to be able to recognize. Because think about it, it's so important that you recognize that two notes are the same, right? It's like such a basic fundamental thing to be able to recognize. And if for whatever reason you can't recognize it, then a good song example, I guess, is just Sweet Child of Mine, right? First two notes, it's just an octave. And there we have it, guys. That is all of the core intervals explained. So, just like the chords, I would thoroughly recommend you go over this as many times as needs be, just to make sure you have all of the different song examples and the sounds of the intervals thoroughly ingrained in your brain. Alrighty, and now, just like last time with the chords, we're now going to do a short two-part quiz to test everything you've learned in this lesson. So, just like the chords quiz before, I'm going to fire at you a bunch of intervals. In the first round, you're going to have the visual representations to help you, to try and sort of like, you know, jog your memory. But in the second round, I'm going to take them away, and you have to rely on just your ears to guess what the intervals are. When you're done, check your answers in the description down below and comment how many you got. Best of luck, guys, and I shall see you for next lesson.